I think the Taliban, they want to compromise. And I'll just list you. First of all, they have suffered enormous casualties, and they are very tired. Many of them have been fighting for 30 years, if not the last 12 years, against the Americans. Thirdly, they are fed up with being micromanaged and manipulated by Pakistan. Their first accusation when they talk to the Americans, they talk to the Germans or Qatar, is the fact that the Pakistanis have jailed them, they've run them. They consider themselves Afghan. They want to be known as Afghan. They don't want to be known as stooges of Pakistan. They want to go back home. But most importantly, are 2-3 other points. The first is that the Taliban do not want to plunge Afghanistan into a civil war after 2014, into a worse civil war. In other words, the Taliban don't want to start a process of conquest, as they did in 1993, and then be confronted by the non-Pashtuns in the north, and then that will prompt an almighty civil war in which all the neighboring states will come in and arm one side or the other. In other words, a repeat of the civil war of the 90s. The Taliban don't want that. And they know that this time they couldn't win like they did last time, because the north is much more developed, more powerful now than it was before. So it would be an endless civil war that you would be talking about. I think the third thing is that the Taliban know that if they try to seize power just in Kabul, they would immediately lose all Western support. All the money would go. You know, whatever pledges had been made, nobody would back a Taliban seizure of power in Kabul. Which means that in 6 months, the Taliban would lose the support of the Afghan population. So I think that would be, you know, and they're deeply aware of that. I mean, they haven't fought 12 years just to, you know, lose their support base because they are not able to feed them, their support base. And if you remember again, that's what happened in 2000, 1 year before 9/11. Actually, all the UN agencies had left, the NGOs had left, the Afghanistan was starving. And millions of refugees started fleeing out of Afghanistan even before 9/11 because of problems of starving and starvation and all the rest of it. So the Taliban don't want to be responsible for a civil war. The Taliban don't want to be responsible for state collapse, which would happen if the West walked away. So much better for the Taliban is to go into partnership with someone like Karzai or whoever the government is, you know, and be able to share power with them, so that the money would keep coming, and the West would have a government and a face to which it would still remain committed. Now the question, the other part of this whole equation, of course, is the really sensitive issue that you asked, which is, what do we do about the Constitution, education, women's rights, all these issues? Now, the Taliban are still demanding Sharia. They're saying this constitution is a liberal, secular, Western, you know, etc. Now, what I believe sincerely is that if these talks with the Americans, you know, I mean, two things had to happen. The Taliban were going to be allowed to open an office in Qatar, in which there would be a permanent delegation where you could go and meet the Taliban on a daily basis. And secondly, there would be a prisoner of exchange, 5 Taliban prisoners at Guantanamo for 1 American that's being held. Now, I think the very fact of, unfortunately, this whole thing is at the moment blocked. If the Taliban were able to open an office, what they desperately need is exposure to the new Afghanistan. Look, they've been sitting in Pakistan in safe houses. They have no idea at this new generation of Afghans that have come up in the last 10, 12 years, educated, working, you know, women included, people, you know, with their rights and want to keep their rights. And I think, you know, that the negotiating process would involve also an exposure process, where the Taliban would be meeting delegations of Afghan students, Afghan women, Afghan educators, Afghan doctors, etc., and be educated about what changes had happened in Afghanistan. And I think we've seen some of that. The Taliban, in many areas, are allowing girls education. Certainly, they have stopped burning all girls' schools for the last year and a half. Now, I'm not saying that's a huge development, but I mean, in the Afghan context, it is. I mean, you know, and more could happen if the Taliban would get exposure. You know, I would like to see women's delegations actually meet with the Taliban and tell the Taliban what they think. you know. So but again, that has to be part of the negotiations.